Um, so I am currently the president and head of R&D at Taysha, and as Frank said, had the opportunity to work on Zolgensma or AVXS-101 for spinal muscular atrophy, and I learned a lot about gene therapy during that process and in working with the FDA and other regulatory agencies. So in December of last year, Sean Nolan and myself took on operating roles at Taysha Gene Therapy, which actually has an intrathecal platform for multiple central nervous system-based disorders, both neurodegenerative and neurodevelopmental. So right now, I'd like to focus on Rett syndrome because this is our lead program, and we've had some very interesting clinical observations that surprised the experts as well as myself. So I think just to give you some background of Rett syndrome, this is a neurodevelopmental disorder. It is primarily an X-linked disorder, which is presenting in girls or females who survive, into their third and fourth decades. Usually in males, it's not compatible with life. So when we designed and started the first in-human trial in Canada, out of Montreal, many experts who reviewed the program and knew this was an adult trial, which was for patients 18 years and older, advised us that we should get safety data and move into the pediatric population as soon as possible, because the thinking at that point in time was in a neurodevelopmental disorder, even though it's different from neurodegenerative, with gene therapy in an adult population that we would not see any clinical impact. So as you can see, the design of this trial was an open label study, a phase 1/2. It had a part A to it, which is 3 patients were given the low dose of 5.7 E14 intrathecally through lumbar puncture. And if the product was seen to be safe and received DSMB or IDMC clearance, we would move to the higher dose of 1E15, again intrathecally by lumbar puncture. Once that was cleared from a safety standpoint, we would move into that chosen dose and have a delayed treatment cohort. So essentially one-to-one matching so that we could compare the active intervention to a kind of a placebo intervention over a certain time frame. But also part of our plan was to look at natural history such that we could compare natural history in this disease state to the intervention arm. And if so, this could accelerate our regulatory timelines. And this is a strategy we used quite effectively with Zolgensma because there was very good natural history. And as you can see, these are patients older than 18 years of age. And this first patient was dosed on May 31st of this year. And within 2 weeks, I got a call from the PI saying she was seeing something very interesting, that patients with Rett syndrome, the first patient dosed, who was a stage 4 female, 20 years of age with severe Rett syndrome, she was seeing remarkable clinical efficacy. And without further, clouding what she described, we're going to go to Dr. Rosignol's video, which captures essentially the clinical impact that she saw on the motor neuromuscular function of this patient, but also when it comes to autonomic dysfunction, which again surprised many of us. So can we play the video, please?
It's a real pleasure to be with you today and tell you a little bit about our first patient in the REVEAL trial. So I'm a pediatric neurologist at Saint Justine Hospital in Montreal. So our first patient is a 20-year-old woman with classical Rett syndrome, now stage 4. She had presented with global developmental delay and hypotonia in a young age. So she was able to sit without support by age 8 months, but she never learned to crawl or cruise. She could stand when held and could take a few steps with assistance starting at the age of 2, but she never was able to stand on her own. She never walked independently. She could reach and grasp for objects, but she never was able to use a pincer grasp. And she also learned a few words starting around 11 months of age, up to 6 words at 2 years. She then presented a slow regression with hand stereotypias that started around a year and a half and were more obvious at 2 years. She had a gradual loss of hand function. At 6 years, she could no longer reach, grasp, or hold objects. And she would remain with closed fists most of the time and paratonia, hypertonia during waking hours. She eventually lost the ability to sit or to stand by age 8 years old. She could no longer stand even with or take steps with support. She's now wheelchair bound, and she also progressively lost leg movement. So she was basically not moving her legs at all, even when lying or in her chair. She lost all her words. Rarely the parents will report that they hear mama maybe once a year. She has frequent bouts of hyperventilation, breath holding spells, sometimes with cyanosis, and that occurs 50 to 75% of the time when awake. And she had disrupted sleep since a very young age with frequent awakenings. She presented with epilepsy. The first seizures occurred at 3 years of age, but they became recurrent at around 5 years and a half. They were initially refractory to many anti-seizure medication listed here, but they were deemed well controlled with Dilantin and clobazam. She received her treatment at the end of May, and we saw clear improvement that started early on within about 2 weeks. So the first thing that the family noticed was a clear improvement in her sleep. She started sleeping full nights, and that was the first time in 20 years that the family was able to sleep all through the night, and that was a major breakthrough for them. Her breathing patterns also changed. The parents reported that during sleep, she now has very stable, deep, basically normal breathing pattern. And her hyperventilation episodes are much more infrequent during the day. So they will occur maybe 5 minutes every hour, in an hour observation, and mostly when she's more anxious or she has discomfort. Her social interest has improved tremendously. So she used to be quiet and modestly interested in activities around her, and she would doze off when she was left unstimulated. But now, since the therapy, she's very interested. She wants to hear and see everything. She refuses to be laid back on her back because she really wants to sit and be aware and be in interactions with people around her. She gets bored now with baby stories that they used to tell her before, or baby movies, and she really wants to watch grown-up movies, and she's interested in more complex stories, and the quality of her interactions really changed. She vocalizes much more. She grunts and makes some other sounds, and the parents clearly heard mama multiple times over single days when she really wants to communicate or attract the attention of her mother. Her gross motor function also improved. She's still quite hypotonic, but she progressively made efforts to try to sit. And since about 35 days post-therapy, she has been able to stay seated without support for a few minutes when placed in a sitting position. She doesn't sit by herself spontaneously, however, but this has been a great improvement. In terms of the tone, we also noticed a major change in her posture and passive tone. So we can now fully extend her legs and arms. Before that, she used to be pretty much in flexed position and dystonic postures all through the day when awake with closed fists. But now we're able to expand and extend completely our arms. She started moving her legs also, and she even started kicking against gravity and resisting during diaper change. So that was a notable improvement. As I mentioned earlier, she was unable to reach or grasp or hold objects for years, but now she's opening her hands and she's dissociating the fingers. She was able to scratch her nose or her face, and she even started reaching for objects of interest. She was able to hold a toy for the first time, and that was a very major event for the family. Overall, we've seen impressive improvement early on that seemed to persist over time, and she still makes some progress over time since the therapy, and we're thus very hopeful with this new therapy. So overall, I'm very thankful to be part of this big adventure, and I thank you for your attention.
So the next video.
Dear colleagues, it's real.
Okay, so actually the next video is Dr. Jenny Downs. She is an expert in Rett hand function. And what we do is we videotape the key evaluations, and then we have it validated by the third party, so that when we hopefully have regulatory interactions, the regulators do know that it's not just our opinions, but it's also experts who are third parties who manage this disease process. So let's play this video as well, please.
My name is Dr. Jenny Downs and I work at Telethon Kids Institute in Australia. The first hand function assessment was before the gene therapy treatment and some hand function was observed. Once helped to grasp a spoon, she was able to hold onto the spoon and lift it up against gravity, but not other objects. Near this time, when sitting on a plinth at the hospital, she was reclined back, not moving her body and with a flat facial expression. 6 weeks after her gene therapy, when sitting on the plinth at the hospital, she sat upright with light support, she had better head control, and her facial expression was bright.
So let's go to the next slide. So before I get into this, we validated these findings with experts, the clinical experts, as well as the basic science experts, such as Sir Adrian Bird from Edinburgh, to really understand what the mechanistic process was. And it was very clear that this gene therapy was having significant clinical impact quite rapidly following intrathecal, infusion into the patient. And furthermore, MECP2, as I think many of you may know, is an intranuclear protein, and it has an orchestra conductor-like effect where it binds to the chromosome, the methylated sites in the chromosome, and can activate 1,000 or plus genes, which then have a network-like effect. So essentially what we've seen here is a reawakening almost of a patient who was not functioning due to very low MECP2 levels, and the assumption here is the gene therapy had this impact. As you can see on this slide, we have dosed the second patient, and we did announce this on September 26th. You'll have to wait till our earnings calls in mid-November to further understand the safety and efficacy in the second patient, as well as how the first patient is doing. We also hope to dose a third adult patient this year, and we've also filed the pediatric IND, and we are getting the sites ready, hopefully, for dosing of patients in the first quarter of next year in the US. We also submitted a CTA in the UK, and we hope to get approval. And if that goes as planned, we do plan to start clinical trials in the UK as well. And our plan eventually is to make this trials available, in a global fashion, such that as many patients can have access to the product. Something I would highlight here is, though, in my experience with multiple gene therapy programs, I have never seen this before, where you can potentially have a gene therapy that you can use across pediatric and adult patient populations. So my hope is once we start doing pediatric studies, that this gene therapy will be as effective or even more effective over time in that population as well, and will be long lasting. So with that, I would like to close my presentation, but thank Frank, Harsha, and Indo US Rare for inviting me for this presentation. And also, I think Dr. Marks, who may have left, but thank him for also working with us on Zolgensma and making that available for patients with SMA. Thank you. Thanks, Frank.